All right, man, peace. So as usual, whenever Colin Kaepernick is not in the news for a certain period of time, the liberal media will go out of their way to reintroduce him. He's kind of like the anti-LeVar Ball. LeVar Ball finds his way into the media, and the liberal media is trying to stop it. Colin Kaepernick, they force him into the media. Why is that? Because he is an agent of chaos. Anyway, Mr. Jay-Z decided that he was going to once again very predictably align Colin Kaepernick with Muhammad Ali. For those of you brothers who've been on my channel for long enough, you know that I've been telling you that this is exactly what the so-called liberal side would do. And once again, when I say liberal, I'm not talking about politically. I'm talking about ideologically. Liberal just is a fancy way of saying that someone is a Marxist. Marxist is a fancy way of saying that someone is a Luciferian. What is a Luciferian? Is someone who adheres to the tenets of Cush, Nimrod, and Semiramis. Meaning what? They worship the entity known as the Baphomet, but is actually talking about Pan, aka Cush. Anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Antonietta, thank you. Appearing on Van Jones' new CNN show, Jay-Z was asked whether he would encourage Colin Kaepernick to kneel during the pregame national anthem in protest of racial inequality and police brutality if his Rock Nation sports agency represented him. Jay-Z responded, quote, "Look how many people play football. They're not all going to be him. Like, he just put his name next to Muhammad Ali."
Now, whenever anyone makes a statement like that Colin Kaepernick put his name, quote unquote, next to Muhammad Ali, what they're basically telling you is that either they have something invested in promoting Colin Kaepernick, or they neither know nor understand the Muhammad Ali story. So I would suspect that it's a little bit of both with Jay-Z, but more option number one, because Jay-Z is a pawn of the so-called quote unquote liberal side. People like him and P. Diddy and the higher levels of quote unquote black entertainment, they know people like George Soros intimately. There was a story that came out a few years ago, where Jay-Z and Alicia Keys and many of the more prominent black entertainers went over to London and actually sat down with members of the British Crown. So these people in the entertainment industry, they understand the machinations of the world society very well. When I say the world society, I'm talking about the quote unquote global government. They see things on a higher level than just presidents of countries. They have an understanding of how the world is actually run and who's actually controlling what.
Lee, would you rather be playing football, getting your head dinged in, or would you rather be an iconic figure for the rest of your life?
Please understand that promoting Colin Kaepernick as a quote unquote iconic figure is an investment. I cannot say that enough. It is an investment by Jay-Z. It is his way of saying that I am down with the cause, that cause being to promote a dissolution of the NFL, because the NFL does not allow itself to be directly socially engineered by the quote unquote powers that be on the left-hand side. When I say the left-hand side, I'm talking about liberalism. The NFL does not proactively promote homosexuality, lesbianism, transgenderism. There was an attempt to force the NFL into promoting homosexuality through Michael Sam. That failed. Okay? That failed because he was not good enough to play in the NFL. So the next step was Mr. Colin Kaepernick, who, as I've already stated, is a plant. His handler is Mr. Nate Boyer, who was a former, quote unquote, former member of the U.S. military Delta Force, Special Forces, as well as Miss Ness Nitty, the so-called DJ on New York radio station here, hip hop radio station. She found her way to Colin Kaepernick through first dealing with Mr. Alden Smith, who was also mentally fractured. But I've covered this story too many times already, but I definitely want to touch on this aspect because Jay-Z is chiming in to once again reintroduce Colin Kaepernick into the lexicon of quote unquote black notables.
If we confuse the idea of having a job with fulfilling your purpose. Interesting stuff. Will Kane, Jalen Rose here with us, joining the conversation. Max, I'll start with you. Is Jay-Z right about Kaepernick?
No. he's not right about the Muhammad Ali comparison, if that's what you're asking. I understand what he means. Kaepernick at personal risk took on an important issue and sparked a movement, in effect.
No, he didn't spark anything. What he started was a bunch of idiotic, woke NFL meatheads into destroying their own money. That's what he did. What he tried to do was blow up the NFL from the inside out, and it almost worked.
And created change, social change. And that, I agree with Jay-Z, is more...
What social change is that? What laws have been passed? The one person who even remotely got involved from an extended level was Mr. Malcolm Jenkins. And he got called every name in the book by all the internet revolutionaries. He's the only one who actually was involved in any tangible change, accepting money and intending to implement it in some way, shape, or form on the ground. Colin Kaepernick, what he basically did was grow out a big afro, put on a black leather jacket, go into his closet and pull out all his old clothes and give them away to ex-convicts. That's pretty much the extent of what Colin Kaepernick has done. They claim that he's given away $1 million. I'm not sure if it's his own money or the money of his sponsors. For those of you who don't know, he was directly associated with Ben Stiller and was supposed to be dispatched over to the Sudan last year when he first came into the forefront of his so-called message, his so-called cause. So I have no doubt that backing him are some Caucasian Jewish liberals.
It's more important than getting your head dinged in, as he put it, on the gridiron. So yes, he is an iconic figure, but much more like Tommy Smith and John Carlos than like Muhammad Ali.
I agree, because both Tommy Smith and John Carlos were Marxists as well. They were being puppeted and pawned by Mr. Harry Edwards, another Marxist who was running around trying to get all the young black athletes during that time period to throw their right fist in the air for Marxism, aka quote-unquote black power. That's why I tell you, brothers, all that black power stuff is all based in socialism/Marxism. They're trying to make you think that you're marching or that you're picketing or that you're protesting for your own self-empowerment. They're really just trying to introduce you to proletarianism. Right? Everybody, let's all be equal. Let's throw away any realistic understanding of history. Our only focus is being equal to everybody. That's socialism/Marxism/Luciferianism.
Kaepernick's a very good football player, got to a Super Bowl. Muhammad Ali is the greatest fighter of all time.
No, I wouldn't say that. Muhammad Ali is the most talented heavyweight of all time. He's not the greatest fighter of all time. I'm sure I'm going to get some pushback about that. Muhammad Ali is not the greatest fighter of all time. Muhammad Ali is the most talented heavyweight. He's the most physically gifted heavyweight of all time. He had unbelievable physical gifts, stamina, fast twitch muscle, reflexes of all time. At 6'3", 210, 212 pounds, he had the speed of a welterweight, if not faster. As I've already stated, Jim Jacobs, who was the former manager of Mike Tyson, measured Muhammad Ali's jab speed, and his jab speed was found to be faster than Sugar Ray Robinson. If you were to ask me who the greatest fighter of all time is, it is without a doubt in my mind Floyd Mayweather. And I'm sure I'm going to get pushback about that. I don't give a damn. When you talk about offense, defense, devotion to his craft, to training, to taking every fight seriously, chin, heart, understanding the business, Floyd Mayweather, without a doubt, he's the only fighter to thoroughly pimp the system.
Had to consistently pull off miracles for the cause for which he fought and for his iconic status to be recalled the way it is. Had to do the impossible in the ring. Kaepernick is not the football player. Muhammad Ali was the boxer. Muhammad Ali, though less educated than Kaepernick, was also more articulate in public forums about the cause for which he stood.
Because he actually was for the cause in which he stood. He was not a program multiple like Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick is nothing but a mannequin. And a lot of people don't understand that. He's an asset. He might as well have a wind-up on his back. Muhammad Ali actually believed in what he was talking about. He was a pawn as well. He was a pawn of the Nation of Islam. But at least he actually believed what he was saying, at least for a while, until he went into conventional Islam and became a pawn of globalism.
Than Kaepernick has been so far. Muhammad Ali also came along at a time in the 1960s where ongoing racial crimes were being committed by governments in the South, by state governments in the South, and there was a crisis that is outsized compared to the racial problems we still face today, which are significant, but not the same as they were in the 1960s.
Well, you're not quite qualified to state that, Mr. Kellerman, but I know that you will anyway because you're a Caucasian Jewish liberal, and you feel like you're qualified to speak for so-called black people and what their situation is today. Now, the problem was different back then, but it's still as harsh today. Why is that? Because whereas back in the 50s and 60s, the so-called black male and female had to deal with Jim Crow and being denied human rights. Now in the 2000s, the new war that's being fought on the black man is cultural. What does that mean? Propaganda to alienate him from his female, from his woman, from his family. The implementation of the prison industrial complex. When you compare the percentage of black men who were incarcerated in the 1950s compared to today, once again, in the 1950s, the average incarcerated inmate was a so-called Caucasian man. Now today, inordinately, the so-called black man is the incarcerated inmate. Why is that? Because the prison industrial complex was implemented in the late 70s going into the 80s, and it was meant to be the new slave system. That's the point of bringing illegal drugs into America and having the so-called black man launder the drugs into clean money through selling it. Not only can you launder the funds, the money, you can sell the drugs, and you can incarcerate the so-called black man, making him basically a stock. When you get incarcerated, you become a stock. All right? Basically, your jail number is your bond number. So that's how that system works. So the condition of the battle is still the same, it's just altered.
And so Ali, at greater personal risk, with a less certain outcome in terms of how that may turn out, the Supreme Court had to say he didn't have to go to jail. So he risked jail time. And for a cause that was more urgent at the time, also as a greater athlete, became an icon in a way Colin Kaepernick will never be. But if you want to compare him to John Carlos or Tommy Smith or someone like that, I take Jay-Z's meaning.
I agree. I would agree with Max on the John Carlos, Tommy Smith comparison to Colin Kaepernick much more because they were both direct pawns of Marxism. Colin Kaepernick just happens to be a pawn on another level. He's actually a programmed asset.
I agree with Max, and here's why. Because no one will ever be Muhammad Ali. That's basically what you just acknowledged. And so I
wouldn't go that far. Once again, look, the brother Ali was very brave, very talented, but many people in the so-called black community, they like to deify him. And the hypocrisy in it is that the time period in which he engaged in many of his racial exploits, he disavowed the ideology that caused him to do what he did. So all those things have to be taken into account. I'm sure a lot of brothers will say, well, you still have to look. I'm not saying that I don't respect the brother's, what he did. He showed a great deal of courage. There's no doubt about that. But when you judge a man, you have to judge him in the total context of the life that he lived. Ali did become a globalist asset from the late 70s onward. They basically trotted him out like a horse from the late 70s all the way to the end of his life. All right? That's a fact.
When you sacrifice as much as Muhammad Ali sacrificed for so very long in his life and became that iconic figure, he's in a world, in a stratosphere of his own. I agree with you, Max, more Tommy Smith, John Carlos, the way they did their Black Power salute throughout the Olympics, and ultimately cost them their opportunities at jobs once they returned to the United States.
Yes, and nothing changed. Just like with Colin Kaepernick, this is what I try to communicate to brothers. The so-called black man allows himself to get caught up in these trends. That's a way to get you off track and get your mind focused on things that are not relevant. Little trendy, silly shit. Things that are not going to have a true benefit down the line. Once all the emotional fervor wears off, where are you? Right where you started.
It defamed those individuals to the point where now they may be walking down the street, and unfortunately a lot of people would not even know who they are. That's the level of sacrifice that they made. But I want to unpack a couple of things. Colin Kaepernick, what he did, a lot of times we always talk about him protesting. When will you protest? When most people are watching. Did you just hear the NFL statement? I wrote this down.
Jalen Rose, bro, you didn't even have the courage to protest Michelle Beadle when she made you eat that hot pepper. Like, this is my thing with a lot of these silly. This is why I call them internet revolutionaries and TV revolutionaries. These guys talk so much shit, and none of them will grow an afro on their job and say, ESPN, I have the right to grow an afro and get down on one knee and protest what's going on to so-called blacks in regards to how they're getting treated by the cops. None of them will sacrifice their check. This is why I did the video that I did on Jamel Hill and her fake ass. Because all they do is get on TV and pose with the fake pro-black shit. And none of them will do it. Why are you trying to advocate for someone doing something that you won't do? Jalen Rose worships his hairline anyway. If he had to grow an afro, he'd kill himself.
They are going to create a program for players so that it doesn't detract from their play? Let me get this right.
Yes, because they're running a business. You know, the same way that ESPN tells you that you have to report to certain assignments, dress a certain way, and make sure that you look cleanly and that you put on makeup so that you make a good appearance for TV. There's something called protocol. In corporate America, you have order, Jalen Rose. You understand that very well. You're not going to allow anything to mess up your money. So why should the NFL allow something to mess up its money?
Whose play got detracted from by players protesting this year? I didn't see it.
Okay, well, check the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room. They almost had an insurrection because their offensive linemen wanted to celebrate the national anthem. And many of the other members of the team were giving him a hard time because allegedly everybody agreed to not do so. There was even a point where the Oakland Raiders offensive line was accused of not blocking for their quarterback because he told them that they should stand for the anthem. So yes, that so-called revolt or protest caused a lot of upheaval and chaos throughout the NFL. So for you to say that you have not heard of it, that means that you're not doing your due diligence, sir. You have not researched the topic properly.
I saw one player, Colin Kaepernick, who lost his opportunity to play football because he chose to protest, and they were pulling people out of whatever leagues to play quarterback, backup quarterback, and get jobs that he could have gotten an opportunity to get.
Well, no, he nullified his chance to get an opportunity when he declared war on the NFL. That's what he did. If you're dealing with a female, she could be drop dead gorgeous. If she tells you that she doesn't like you, that she hates you, you'd be a fool to deal with her again. That's how that works, Jalen Rose. When you're running a business, you can have an employee that works for you who does a good job. But if you find out that he's stealing a couple dollars, that he's disrespectful to other employees, you must let that person go. And if they try to reapply for the job, the answer is no. You're fucking with my money and I can't have that. That's how that works in the real world.
But there are different levels of protest that I want to make sure people understand. There's a passive protest. In a passive protest, what is it? You're picketing. You're holding signs. Then there's the direct action protest, where you're striking, where you're doing something physically dominant to something that you oppose. That didn't happen with NFL players. And so for them to take that opportunity to take a knee, to raise a fist at their place of work where it was heightened, I salute them.
Yes, you salute them for doing something that you yourself won't do. Once again, you're scared of Michelle Beadle. You won't even protest Michelle Beadle forcing a damn hot pepper on you. But you're going to salute other people for potentially destroying their money-making ability. Because all the money that they lose with the loss of viewership is going to result in a loss of money when it comes time to cut checks and to collectively bargain the next agreement. That's what's going to happen, sir.
For taking that opportunity and heighten the opportunity for others to have that level of strength. I was a member of the Denver Nuggets when Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf chose to do the exact same thing against the national anthem. I felt like that was his right.
Well, how come you didn't join him? You should have joined him, brother. How come you didn't say, I'm going to protest the national anthem? You know why? Because you were 1 or 2 years in the league and you said, if I do this, I can get cut and I might lose my money. That's why you didn't join in, because Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf ended up getting ran out the league, and you didn't want to join him. So once again, you're just talking shit.
Right? I feel like it's Colin Kaepernick's right, and there's so many people that are going to talk about this topic, but that would not be willing to do the same level of sacrifice.
Yeah, you being one of them. You the main one talking about it as not willing to do the same sacrifice. That's what I mean with the hypocrites on these sports networks, just talking shit all damn day. Oh yeah, Kaepernick did this and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf did that. And what did you do, Jalen? I didn't do nothing. And let me say this, Jalen Rose has an academy in Detroit. He does a lot of actually rational things to try to help so-called black people. He does that, and I give him credit for that. But for him to get on TV and try to extol gestures and protests that lead nowhere and that are empty and that are meant to foment anarchy, no. What Colin Kaepernick did was not good. He never had a plan. He had a lot of feminine energy in him. He still does. He's confused. And that's normally what happens to people of so-called mixed race. They normally get confused. And beyond that, he's a monarch athlete. That's the summation with him.
Go ahead, Will.
Well, it's kind of interesting when we have these conversations and there's four of us together. I'm surprised, well, it's genuinely the nation that I'm the one that stands out differently, but I'm a little surprised how this one broke down. I don't find this comparison completely off base, Max, Jalen. I mean, there's no comparison of their greatness. There's just none. But we're not comparing who is greater in their field. We're not.
Yeah, we're not. So why are you bringing it up? We all know that Muhammad Ali in boxing and Colin Kaepernick in football are worlds apart. So don't even touch on that. It's not relevant.
We're not. Colin Kaepernick doesn't hold a candle to what Muhammad Ali was to boxing. But as far as an iconic figure when it comes to social issues and social causes, I don't think Jay-Z's off. For the record, it's Van Jones that put Muhammad Ali's name next to Colin Kaepernick's. Jay-Z echoed it. He said, you're the one that just put it next to it, and he's recognizing and sort of seconding it. And I don't think it's completely off base. Look, they both stood for a cause. They were both controversial in their time, not just for what they said, but for the causes they stood for. And they both made great sacrifice. I would say, Max, the one point you made that I do agree with is this. Muhammad Ali was much more well-versed in the cause he stood for.
Well, as you acknowledge, seeing as Muhammad Ali was much more well-versed in the cause he stood for, how could you say that Colin Kaepernick ever really stood for a cause at all? The point of standing for a cause is that you can articulate the cause and that you understand what the solutions are that you want. You may not understand the methodology with which you want to pursue that solution, but you should at least have a solution. Colin Kaepernick never had any of that. Even on surface value, even on face value, from a surface level perspective, Colin Kaepernick is clearly a two-dimensional thinker who was emotionally roused up by a lot of the so-called racial occurrences that were being promoted via social media. His clock got wound up just from that, and that's not even counting the introduction of Miss Ness Nitty and as well as Nate Boyer into his life, who were able to manipulate him. You have to ask yourself a question. Even a lot of you brothers who might feel like my statements about him being a monarch athlete or being an asset are a little bit out of bounds or a little bit far-fetched. You must ask yourself why a so-called proud black man like Colin Kaepernick, who claims to be against racism, would allow himself to be manipulated by a Nate Boyer to the degree that he was. Please check out the video that I did on Nate Boyer, where I go through his background. I have little doubt in my mind what Colin Kaepernick is.
He gave better and stronger and clearer voice to the change that he wanted. It's been my consistent criticism of Kaepernick from day one. I love the line that Jay-Z said in this interview with Van Jones. He said, sometimes we confuse having a purpose with having a job, or having a job with having a purpose. They're not the same thing. I totally agree. And my criticism of Kaepernick has been, be clear about your purpose.
He can't be clear because he's not qualified to be clear. Kaepernick is a worker ant. That's all he is. He gets dispatched out to collect his crumbs. His job was to try to cause some type of anarchy in the NFL. He did a great job of it. He almost crippled the league, him as well as his assistants, Michael Bennett, etc. That is why they got all frothy at the mouth when Malcolm Jenkins actually attempted to bring some resolution to the issue, because they just wanted it to keep going and going and going and going until the NFL got crippled. Allegedly, they wanted to meet at the table with NFL owners and discuss quote-unquote business. And when they were brought to the table, they had no business to discuss because they're not qualified to discuss anything serious. No disrespect. That's why I call them woke meatheads. And some people might get upset by that. I don't care. When you look back at what many of the NFL players were stating in the aftermath of their initial meetings with the owners, it's very clear that they have psychological issues. Many of those players who attended that meeting had psychological issues. The only one who seemed to have his shit together mentally was Malcolm Jenkins. So it did not surprise me when he was the one who they decided to work through. And you notice that what was it that Mr. Michael Bennett was stating in the aftermath of the initial meetings with the owners? Well, the first thing we got to do is get Colin back in the league. It wasn't the first thing that we have to do is develop a plan to so-called help the different black communities across America, which you claim that's what your main focus was, allegedly. It was trying to figure out how to get your Optimus Prime, your Grand Poobah, Colin Kaepernick back into the NFL so that you all could form like Voltron all around him. Right? Or stand around him like he's Optimus Prime and he could yell roll out. Give me a fucking break. You know, Seattle should have brought Colin Kaepernick onto that team because they were a woke team anyway. They had no chance to win a championship as it was. Just bring Kaepernick in and trade Russell Wilson, and you know, they could all just grow out their afro, not even wear a football helmet, just grow out their afro. The afro could cushion the blows.
Racial inequality. Solving racial inequality is not a clear enough purpose. How do you do that? I think the Players Coalition with Malcolm Jenkins has given strong voice to specifics. When not, there are other issues like school choice, police reform. That's where Colin Kaepernick can get closer to emulating Muhammad Ali.
No, he couldn't get closer to emulating Muhammad Ali by doing that because Muhammad Ali never had any plans for this society to continue. While he was a member of the Nation of Islam, his plan was total separation. That's why I state I've always had more respect for Ali of all athletes. He's the only one that I truly had respect for because he actually not only had beliefs, but he also was teamed up with an organization that had a plan. Not that I necessarily agree with their ideology or their plan, but at least he was part of an organization that had a plan. Kaepernick has never had a plan. And the reason why he's getting feted by many of these liberal organizations is because he's embraced their ideologies. Most of these liberal organizations are just fronts for Marxism. And he's a Marxist. That's why, once again, brothers, that's why he wears all black. You know, when you start to really pay attention to what these people do, it's really easy to spot them. It's like the movie The Terminator, how the dog could spot the Terminator. It's easy to spot what these people are about once you understand the signs.
But I think this is not as far off as everyone thinks. Muhammad Ali was more controversial then than people can appreciate. He's an icon now. Then, he was a big source of controversy.
Yeah, because he couldn't be controlled. The reason why the media is so much behind Colin Kaepernick is because he's controlled. Ali was being controlled by the Nation of Islam. He was not being controlled by the mainstream media or by the quote-unquote left wing like Colin Kaepernick is. Right, Ali was being controlled by the Nation of Islam. Now, he became an asset of the quote-unquote liberal agenda in the late 70s and from then onward. And this is why I stated in previous videos, it's obvious to me that the Marxists / international investors, the true manipulators of the societal reprogramming agenda in America, they said to themselves, what we need is to generate another athlete similar to Ali, who we could link up with Ali subconsciously and try to get him to guide many of the younger blacks who are infatuated with social media into a certain thought process. The main thing we must do is get rid of the NFL because the NFL will not allow itself to be reprogrammed, socially engineered like the NBA has. The NBA is a woke league, so that's why it's not necessary for them to have any of the monarch athletes in the NBA try to disrupt what's going on. They're already woke. Adam Silver's already woke. So they don't need to try to push or promote any type of agenda in the NBA.
He was a big source of controversy, and that's the reason why I don't believe there's a comparison that's warranted between Colin Kaepernick and Muhammad Ali. So I agree with Jalen and Max on that, but I'll take it a step further. We got to dissect things the way that they are. We're trying to give Colin Kaepernick a boatload of credit, in my estimation, that he may not necessarily deserve. He doesn't need to be villainized. He deserves our support. He was clearly blackballed by the NFL in certain ways because of it, and nobody's refuting that.
He wasn't blackballed by the NFL. He was a former employee who they decided was more trouble than he was worth. That's all he was. At best, he was viewed as a potential backup quarterback. Nobody's going to jump through hoops for a potential backup quarterback. Colin Kaepernick, even before he started his protest, was viewed as being a guy who was on his way out of the NFL. Now, I've made this comparison before. Nobody's sitting around wondering whatever happened to Josh Freeman. Colin Kaepernick was a slightly better version of Josh Freeman, and only because he had one of his initial handlers, Jim Harbaugh, helping lead the way. That's all he ever was. So one read quarterback who telegraphs all his throws with bad footwork.
But we've gone away from dissecting what his original purpose was and how things transpired. When Muhammad Ali decided not to enter the military and honor his religious beliefs, and he took that position. Of course, it was highly controversial, but it cost him everything. Not only was he looking at 5 years in prison, he wasn't allowed to be hired in boxing in the United States, and on top of it all, his passport was confiscated, so he couldn't go overseas to earn money. Colin Kaepernick was in the National Football League earning a check. There was no hardcore rule against standing or kneeling for the national anthem, which means that at that particular juncture in time, it wasn't clear whether or not he was indeed putting his career in jeopardy.
And beyond that, after Kaepernick was no longer allowed to sign with the NFL team, after the NFL made that business decision, or the NFL owners collectively seemed to come to that decision, I'm not going to claim collusion because, for the simple fact, I don't think that it took all 30-plus owners to sit down together and say, we agreed to not sign Kaepernick. I think that they all came to that conclusion on their own, that he was just not worth the trouble. But even beyond that, once he was out of the NFL, it's clear to me that he had financial backers on the liberal side. That's why I noted how he was going to be dispatched over to the Sudan by Ben Stiller. They're not just going to send you somewhere like that unless they're already giving you a check. That's why he got trotted out for some of these award ceremonies just in time for his book.
Remember that when he took a knee, he had taken a knee for weeks upon weeks at a time, and no one had really noticed it until somebody ultimately walked up to him and asked him about it. And then his position was one thing, and then it evolved in the days and weeks to have followed. And because of that, this maelstrom of momentum and beyond came into the equation. We have to look at that and look at its intent and say, okay, did he intend to be somebody that mirrored what Muhammad Ali did or what Muhammad Ali was willing to do?
Sounds like Stephen A. Smith is finally starting to come to some type of revelation. Either that or he's been watching my channel. Because the man said, did Colin Kaepernick intend to project an image similar to a Muhammad Ali? I believe that he was groomed, once again, that he was groomed to try to align him in a certain way with a Muhammad Ali, to garner some type of respect amongst the so-called black athletes and the so-called black community at large via social media. This guy, Colin Kaepernick, people forget this. Before this whole protesting thing, he was viewed as a pariah in the locker room. Walked around with his headphones on, supposedly a leader of men, supposed to be a quarterback leading your team. Didn't know how to interact with others, always had his headphones on. Now all of a sudden he's supposed to be Malcolm X. Give me a break.
There's a legitimate argument that could be made that is not the case because Colin Kaepernick never appeared to have a plan, which brings what Will said.
Yeah, well, I've been saying that for the longest time, bro. Welcome to the club.
Into the equation when you talk about a job or a purpose. Well, guess what? Colin Kaepernick didn't seem to have a purpose because his intentions were not clear. I'm not saying his heart wasn't in the right place. I'm not saying he wasn't striving to do the right thing.
Maybe it became his purpose, Stephen A. I think that's what he meant. It became his purpose.
Here comes Molly, the agent of chaos. Remember, she's being puppeted by her man, Jalen Rose. And I'm not sure if they even still together. They most likely still are. Because Jalen makes a lot of appearances on this show, and I doubt if he wasn't still, if he wasn't still handling his business with her. But you'll notice that Molly will oftentimes pop up and say certain things in regards to black issues. He certainly is operating her by remote control. There's nothing wrong with that. They should be simpatico. But no, it was not possible for Colin Kaepernick to suddenly understand what the cause was if he didn't understand what the cause was in the first place, right? He never understood what the cause was in the first place. He was being remoted. That's it. He allowed himself to be manipulated emotionally. He stepped out, and suddenly he was being forced to articulate, and he couldn't articulate the alleged cause that he was standing for because he never understood it in the first place.
Purpose.
Well, maybe it became his purpose, but once it became, the point is it became his purpose because he had found himself in the throes of that controversy. Then suddenly you have to take a stance.
Exactly.
If I take a stance...
I want to clear something up about Ali. I want to clear one thing up about Ali. This idea that he was very specific in terms of his agenda. Muhammad Ali, the controversy with him started when he first won the title after he beat Sonny Liston as a 10-1 underdog and told the world, I am no longer Cassius Clay, that's my slave name. I'm Muhammad Ali. And announced that he joined a very controversial group, the black Muslims in this country.
No, sir. He did not join the black Muslims. And that's a title that even Muhammad Ali stated explicitly that he found disrespectful. It's very similar to the term Black Hebrew Israelites. And a lot of you brothers who are members of these camps, you should not allow yourself to be called that, because that term is not in the scriptures. Okay? That's a term that is oftentimes used on many of these various so-called black or so-called ethnic-based organizations, allegedly ethnicity-based organizations, to categorize you by the government. When they add that term black, they're stating basically they're calling you a terrorist group or quasi-terrorist group. It's also an attempt to imply that the original is Caucasian. When you add a term like black, that is an adjective. That is an attempt to distinguish it from the original. Right? They will never call them the white Jews or the white this. They'll just call them Jews, and you're supposed to conjure in your mind the image of a Caucasian person with curls on the side of their head and a yarmulke on the top of their head. But when you use the term black Jew or black Muslim, that truly is to denote a terrorist organization, a group that is meant to be a counter to something original. And Max Kellerman called them black Muslims. They're not black Muslims. They were known as the Nation of Islam. That was the name of the organization, or still is the name of the organization.
And that was the first firestorm of controversy around Ali.
But that doesn't have much to do with this, Max, because that wasn't the reason his boxing license was stripped and he was denied the opportunity to earn a living.
Oh, yes, it was. Yes, it was. Because he was reclassified in the draft. The odds were something like 100,000 to 1 that he would have been reclassified, so that he was put in the position where he had to not take the first step.
I'm not questioning that. I'm not questioning that. I know they were out to get him. Obviously, they were out to get the black Muslims at that particular moment in time. I'm not denying that. I'm simply saying him announcing to the world that he no longer wanted to be recognized as Cassius Clay. That would not have been legal cause for them to strip him.
Let's let Jalen get back in.
No, Stephen, you're wrong. Max Kellerman is correct. And you just don't want to admit you're wrong because you had a liberal Caucasian man correct you on Muhammad Ali and it made you look bad on TV. But you're incorrect. From the moment that Ali came out and announced that his name was going to be Muhammad Ali and that he was going to be an official member, a publicly recognized member of the Nation of Islam, the government, just like Max Kellerman said, decided to reclassify him. And that's what led to him losing a lot of opportunities to fight in America. If you look at Ali's fight schedule, he fought a rematch with Liston in Maine, then he fought fight against Floyd Patterson in Las Vegas, I believe in late 1965. After that, he didn't even fight in America for most of 1966. I think the fight after that, he fought George Chuvalo in Canada. Then he went overseas and he had a tour where he beat up the 3 Caucasian Europeans. I believe it was a rematch with Henry Cooper and then Brian London, and then Carl Mildenberger. And then he came back to America and fought Cleveland Williams in late 1966. So all that stemmed from his public acknowledgement that he was a member of the Nation of Islam. First they were stopping him from getting fight dates and fight sites here in America. And when he came back, which he never should have done, he should have stayed in Europe and continued to fight there really all the way into the early 70s. He could have done that, but he didn't. And his management team, led by Mr. Herbert Muhammad, should have directed him to do that. But they were more concerned about taking his money than giving him proper instructions. Anyway, he came back to America in late 1966, He had his most impressive showing of his career against Cleveland Williams, a fighter who was a shell of his former self. And then he beat the hell out of Ernie Terrell for 15 rounds. And then he beat Zora Foley, and that was that. They stripped him. And did not allow him to leave America. So Max Kellerman, to make a long story short, was correct, Steve.
There are also certain iconic figures that you just can't deny what they were able to accomplish. Muhammad Ali is on that level, and then everybody else comes second nature.
Yes.
But the fascinating thing about this for me is that a lot of times we think things are happening for the first time. There's a movie called Higher Learning that I remember from the mid-'90s. There's a Ice Cube's character was telling Omar Epps, what would you do as an athlete if you were in the arena and everybody was looking at you when the national anthem played and they were white and you didn't stand? And he challenged them on that. He said, I'd stand because I feel embarrassed. Well, the thing that I like to fast forward now is Colin Kaepernick and so many NFL athletes, they took that opportunity and they made a statement. There's so many people that are going to speak into microphones, that are going to play sports, that don't give back to their community,
well, hold on,
that don't have foundations. So for guys to do...
Now you see what Jalen did there? He was throwing himself in there because, like I stated, he has the school. Well, look, he used the comparison of Omar Epps' character in Higher Learning. If Omar Epps' character stated that he wanted to stand for the national anthem because he wouldn't be embarrassed, that's his prerogative. It's the same thing that Mr. Jalen Rose did when he ate that hot pepper because Michelle Beadle put the heat on him. That's exactly the same thing, and that's exactly what occurred. You conformed because you did not want to be, in your view, publicly embarrassed or publicly shamed for not going along with the hijinks of eating a hot pepper allegedly for ALS. That had nothing to do with what Mr. Colin Kaepernick did.
Do this, I definitely applaud that level of courage.
Well then, hell, you should have rejected Michelle Beadle, and you should also get down on one knee on the air and state that you're going along with Colin Kaepernick. Because if what he did was courageous, for you to not do it must mean that you like courage, by your logic.
Only thing I want to say is this. Nobody is trying to take any credit away from Colin Kaepernick. But when you make the comparisons to Muhammad Ali, it provokes this kind of discussion. It's not to diminish what Colin Kaepernick has done. It's to recognize it doesn't quite elevate to the status of a Muhammad Ali. And whether it's Van Jones or Jay-Z or any...
Well, I'm diminishing what Colin Kaepernick did. All right? I'm diminishing it. And I'm sure certain people are not going to like that. It is what it is. It's okay. It's just so-called pro-blacks and the liberal blacks and the internet revolutionaries. They love to engage in these rituals where they get to chase their own tail. And... it's really because they're trying to chase after the Caucasian and get that hug.
Anybody else, they might need to pump the brakes on that particular statement. That's all we're saying.
And Will, good job, by the way, clearing that up. It wasn't Jay-Z, apparently.
That's the way I heard it.
Hey, stand for nothing, you fall for anything.
Very true. Yeah. And Higher Learning, a classic, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a classic, Molly. You got to sit there and watch all those black men in college. Lord knows what happened. You probably had to change your drawers. But anyway, that's the conversation on Jay-Z and his attempt to synchronize Colin Kaepernick with Muhammad Ali, of course, at the suggestion of Van Jones. But anyway, peace.